My husband was on stage accepting the Partner of the Year award, thanking me for my support. He had no idea that I knew about his affair with his boss and that he'd stolen our life savings for her. He also had no idea a process server was about to walk on stage and serve him with a fraud lawsuit in front of his entire company. Before we begin, my dear listeners, write from which city you are listening to this amazing story. It is very important for me to collect stories from all over the country and continents. Sunday mornings in our Atlanta home were a sacred ritual, a weekly reaffirmation of the life Marcus and I had built over 28 years. The air was always thick with the comforting aromas of my fresh baked oatmeal cookies and the rich, earthy scent of the chicory coffee he adored. I had just returned from the early service at Ebenezer Baptist Church, where my hands, which spent the week guiding students through scales and sonatas, found their own form of worship on the keys of the grand pipe organ. It was my service and my sanctuary. Marcus met me at the door, a steaming mug of coffee already in his hand, and kissed me. "Good morning, my queen," he murmured against my hair. Our marriage was a fortress, built brick by brick with decades of shared jokes, quiet partnership, and these unwavering rituals. It was a testament to our joint success. "I was looking at our Amalfi Coast itinerary," I said, spreading a colorful travel brochure across the granite island in our kitchen. "For our 30th, it's going to be the trip of a lifetime, Marcus." He paused for a fraction of a second, his smile tightening almost imperceptibly. "Are you sure now is the best time, Vivian? With everything going on, are the finances okay?" I smiled back, a warm, reassuring expression I'd perfected over the years. "Marcus, we are not just okay, we are blessed," I answered softly. "Our children are grown and successful. Our home is paid for. We have worked our entire lives for precisely this." I could see the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the deep lines of a man under immense pressure. I attributed it all to his fight for the senior partnership at his prestigious architecture firm, a battle he had been waging for the better part of a year. He spoke constantly of his boss, Diana Sterling, a brilliant, dynamic, and demanding woman whom I, in my trusting ignorance, had only ever pictured as his mentor. "You've earned this promotion, my love," I said, wrapping my arms around his waist. "You've worked harder than anyone." "I couldn't have done any of it without you, Viv," he whispered into my shoulder. I understand now that those were not the words of a grateful husband, but the confession of a guilty man, weighed down by the sheer scale of his own deception. Later that morning, he got a call. His face soured. "It's Diana," he sighed, showing me his phone. "Another emergency with the Sterling Tower project. Even on a Sunday. Can you believe it?" He kissed me goodbye, a quick, almost frantic peck, and rushed out, leaving the scent of his expensive cologne and his quiet lies lingering in the air. With the house to myself, I sat down at the antique mahogany desk in our study. This was my domain. I, Vivian Vance, a respected professor of classical and gospel piano, had always been the financial bedrock of our family. Marcus was the visionary architect, the dreamer who painted cities with glass and steel. I was the pragmatist, the metronome that kept our lives in perfect, harmonious rhythm. I managed our investment portfolios, our retirement accounts, and our monthly budget with a precision that bordered on obsession. It was I who had made the shrewd investments in the early 90s that had paid for our children's college education. It was I who had built the fortress of financial security that allowed Marcus the freedom to pursue his grand ambitions. At precisely 2:00 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from him. The message, in all caps, radiated a triumphant energy. "I got it. Diana just made it official. Senior partner, let's celebrate tonight, baby. A wave of pure, unadulterated joy washed over me. He had done it. All those late nights, those stressful weekends, it had all paid off. A simple dinner at our usual restaurant felt too tame for such a monumental achievement. I wanted to share in his triumph, to see the look on his face in his moment of victory. I put on my favorite silk dress, a deep sapphire blue that brought out the warmth in my skin. I retrieved the gift I had been saving for this exact occasion for months, a magnificent, hand-stitched leather briefcase with his initials, MAV, elegantly embossed in gold. Inside, on a small brass plate, I'd had a private message engraved, "My partner, in all things, forever, V." Clutching the heavy, beautiful gift, I drove downtown towards the glittering glass skyscraper that housed his firm. I felt a giddy, youthful excitement, a feeling I hadn't had in years. I was a wife about to surprise her victorious husband, a queen coming to celebrate with her king in his castle. I had no idea I was walking willingly into the ruins of my own kingdom. The lobby of the Sterling Tower was a cathedral built to the god of modern commerce. It was a vast, echoing space of polished black granite, soaring glass walls, and a silence so profound it seemed to absorb all sound. This was Marcus's world, a world of power and ambition that I had always supported from a comfortable, respectful distance. As I approached the large, intimidating reception desk, the young woman behind it looked up. Her eyes, expertly lined in black, flickered from my face to the expensive briefcase in my hand, and a strange, almost imperceptible expression crossed her face. It was a look of pity. So fleeting I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. "I'm here to see Marcus Vance," I said, my voice bright with a joy that felt utterly genuine. "It's a surprise." "He's on the executive floor, ma'am," she said, her voice professionally flat, "with Miss Sterling." As she buzzed me through the security gates, the elevator doors opened, and a man I recognized from Marcus's holiday party stepped out. It was Frank, a senior architect from a rival team, a man known for his sharp tongue and sharper ambition. He saw me, and a slow, cruel smile spread across his face, a smile that seemed to know a secret I didn't. "Well, well, Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice oozing a false sycophantic charm, "come to celebrate the big win?" "I heard Marcus finally closed the deal on his project with Diana. They're still up there last I saw. I'm sure he's thanking her right now with all the due diligence a new senior partner can muster." His words were like a spray of ice water, each one landing with a tiny, sharp sting. The innuendo was as thick as the humid Atlanta air, a suggestion so ugly, so contrary to the fortress of my marriage that my mind refused to process it. I forced a tight, polite smile onto my face. "Frank," I said, my voice colder than I intended, "it's always a pleasure." I stepped past him into the waiting elevator, his quiet, knowing chuckle following me as the doors slid shut. The ride up to the 50th floor was the longest of my life. The mirrored walls of the elevator reflected a woman I barely recognized, a woman in a beautiful silk dress, her face a mask of forced cheerfulness, a cold knot of dread tightening in her stomach. I clutched the heavy leather briefcase, the engraved brass plate inside feeling like a foolish, childish trinket. "He's just jealous," I told myself. "A bitter, jealous colleague, that's all it is." But the seed of doubt, planted by the receptionist's pity and watered by Frank's malice, had already begun to sprout. The elevator opened onto a hushed, plushly carpeted corridor. The executive floor was a world of its own, a silent testament to power with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a godlike view of the city lights twinkling to life as dusk began to fall. At the far end of the hall was Diana Sterling's office, a massive corner suite with a wall of frosted glass. As I drew closer, I heard them. It was not the sound of a late-night work session. It was the sound of relaxed, unrestrained intimacy. I heard Marcus's deep, familiar laugh, a sound that had been the soundtrack to my entire adult life. It was followed by a woman's voice, a throaty, confident chuckle that was deeper than my own. They sounded so easy, so comfortable, so utterly at home with one another. My heart was pounding now, a frantic drum against my ribs. I reached the glass door, my hand raised to knock, the joyful word surprise already formed on my lips. It was then through a clear panel in the frosted glass that I saw them. And the world, the solid, dependable world that Vivian and Marcus Vance had built, stone by stone for 28 years, crumbled into silent, glittering dust. There, silhouetted against the breathtaking panorama of the city, stood my husband. His hands were wrapped firmly around the waist of Diana Sterling. Her arms were looped around his neck, her fingers tangled in his hair, and she was kissing him. It was not a fleeting, mistaken kiss. It was a long, slow, hungry kiss, a kiss of ownership and profound familiarity. It was the kiss of two people who had done this 1,000 times before. This was not a moment of weakness. This was their reality. The briefcase, the heavy, beautiful symbol of my faith in our shared future, slipped from my numb fingers. It landed on the thick, sound-dampening carpet with a soft, muffled thud. The sound was nothing, a whisper in the silent hallway. But in my soul, it was the sound of a landslide, of a fortress collapsing in on itself. They didn't hear it. They didn't see me. They were in their world, a world where I did not exist. The shock was a mercy. It was so absolute, so devastating, that it bypassed rage and pain and went straight to a place of cold preternatural calm. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not burst through the door to confront them. I simply stood there for a heartbeat, a silent witness to the demolition of my life. Then, without making a sound, I slowly, deliberately backed away from the door. I turned, my posture as straight and dignified as a queen's, and walked back down the long corridor. I rode the elevator down with a group of chattering junior employees, my face a serene, unreadable mask. I walked through the grand lobby, past the receptionist who now refused to meet my eyes. I stepped out into the cool evening air, a woman who had entered this building as a happy, loving wife and was now leaving as a stranger to her own life. The fortress was gone, and I was standing alone in the ruins. The 20-minute drive home from the Sterling Tower was a journey through a silent, screaming void. The city lights of Atlanta, usually a comforting, glittering tapestry, blurred into meaningless streaks of color through the unshed tears in my eyes. My mind, the place of order, music, and meticulous planning, was a wasteland of white noise. I was on autopilot, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my foot pressing the pedals, but I was not truly there. I was a ghost driving a ghost of a car through the ruins of a life I had thought was real. The fortress had fallen, and I was a refugee fleeing the rubble. When I walked into our home, the sanctuary we had shared for nearly 3 decades, every object seemed to mock me. The faint, lingering aroma of the chicory coffee I had prepared that morning was the scent of my own foolishness. A pair of Marcus's leather loafers sat by the door, a casual testament to a man who was not who he claimed to be. On the mantelpiece, a silver-frame photograph of us on our 25th anniversary, smiling into the camera in a vineyard in Napa, was no longer a cherished memory but a grotesque piece of evidence in a long con. I saw not a happy couple, but a loving wife and a brilliant actor. The house was no longer a home, it was a crime scene, and I had been the unsuspecting victim for years. The initial paralyzing shock began to recede, but it was not followed by the flood of tears I had been expecting. I did not collapse onto the floor in a fit of sobs. I did not scream into a pillow. Instead, a different sensation, cold and sharp, began to rise from the pit of my stomach. It was the familiar, focused energy of a problem that needed to be solved. He had forgotten who I was. I was not just Vivian the pianist, Vivian the wife. I was Vivian the meticulous manager of our entire financial world. My heart was broken, but my mind, the most powerful and underestimated part of me, was just beginning to wake up. Instead of going to the bedroom to weep, I walked into our home office. I sat down at the mahogany desk where, for decades, I had paid our bills, managed our portfolios, and planned our secure, comfortable future. I turned on the computer, the soft hum of the machine a familiar comfort in the deafening silence. This was my domain. This was where the emotional lies of our life were stripped away, leaving only the cold, hard data of numbers and facts. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the real story of his betrayal was not in Diana's office, but here, hidden in plain sight within the digital ledgers I so carefully maintained. I started with our primary joint retirement account, a substantial fund that I had nurtured with a fierce maternal pride. The balance was healthy, but as I scrolled through the transaction history, a knot of ice formed in my stomach. I saw a series of large withdrawals over the past 3 years, each one disguised as a portfolio management transfer to a secondary account I didn't recognize. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. With trembling fingers, I began to follow the trail. I pulled up the statements for the credit cards that were in his name only. The ones he had always insisted were for business expenses that he would sort out himself. For years, I had respected that boundary, a foolish act of trust in a man who deserved none. Now I breached it without a second thought. And the full sordid scope of his secret life unfurled across the glowing screen. The charges were a litany of his deceit. There were 5-star hotels in Chicago, San Francisco, and New Orleans, always for 2 nights, always on weekends when he was supposedly on a solo business trip. There was a charge from a year ago for $7,000 at a high-end exclusive jewelry store. I remembered that Christmas. He had given me a lovely but modest pair of pearl earrings. I now knew who the truly expensive gift had been for. There were first-class airline tickets for 2, to a resort in Miami for an architectural conference I had not been invited to. I cross-referenced the dates. Diana Sterling had been the keynote speaker at that same conference. They hadn't even bothered to be clever about it. Each transaction was a separate, calculated betrayal. He wasn't just cheating on me, he was making me pay for it. He was siphoning funds from the future I was building for us, our golden years, our trip to Italy, and using it to finance his tawdry affair. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it was what truly staggered me. He had used my own skill, my financial acumen that had created this wealth, as his personal slush fund. I found the folder on the desktop where I had saved the plans for our Amalfi Coast trip. The carefully researched hotels, the planned tours of Pompeii, the budget I had meticulously crafted. Then my eyes caught another transaction on his credit card statement from just last month. a charge for 2 premium tickets to the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival for the very same week we were supposed to be in Italy. I felt a laugh, a sharp, bitter, and humorless sound bubble up from my chest. He was planning to break my heart and then go listen to the blues on my dime. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a pale gray light into the office. I had been there all night, surrounded by the glowing screens that served as a digital testament to his lies. The woman who had left the Sterling Tower in a state of shock was gone. In her place was a woman forged in the cold, hard fire of financial data. He had not just broken my heart. He had committed calculated, long-term fraud against our legal and financial partnership. My phone buzzed on the desk, startling me. It was a text from Marcus. Meeting ran impossibly late, so exhausted. See you in the morning. Love you. I looked at the casual, easy lie on the screen, the 3 little words he tossed off like a piece of loose change. The shock was gone. The grief was gone. All that remained was the cold, clean certainty of a mathematician who has just solved a complex and deeply ugly equation. He thought I was just his wife. He had forgotten I was also his banker. And this bank was about to call in every single one of his debts. I sat in the pre-dawn stillness of my office, the world outside still draped in shades of gray and indigo. The only light came from the computer screens that glowed like accusatory portals displaying the digital wreckage of my 28-year marriage. I felt a strange, hollowed-out calm. The grief was a tangible thing, a cold stone in my gut, but it was no longer a chaotic, overwhelming force. It had been replaced by a quiet, methodical rage. The sound of the garage door opening made me flinch. It was morning. He was home. I heard his keys clatter into the ceramic bowl by the door, followed by his heavy, tired footsteps on the stairs. A few minutes later, he appeared in the doorway of the office, looking rumpled and exhausted, a convincing performance of a man who had just pulled an all-nighter for his career. "Morning," he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "You're up early. Don't tell me you've been balancing the checkbook all night." He chuckled, a sound that was suddenly grotesque to my ears. "Something like that," I said, my voice carefully neutral. I didn't turn to look at him. I kept my eyes fixed on the spreadsheet of his betrayals on the screen in front of me. "God, I'm exhausted," he sighed, leaning against the doorframe. "Diana is a slave driver, but I have to admit she's a genius. We finally cracked that structural problem with the tower. It was a breakthrough. He was trying to draw me in to make me a co-conspirator in the narrative of his success." "You must be tired," I said, my voice as flat and empty as a tomb. "You should get some rest." My coldness seemed to finally register. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. All right, I get it. I'm sorry I was out all night. But Viv, this was for us, the partnership. It's finally real." He came over and tried to kiss the top of my head, but I leaned forward, pretending to look closer at the screen. He paused, then shrugged, his ego too large to consider that my coldness could be anything more than a temporary sulk. "Fine," he said. "I'm going to bed. Don't be mad at me for too long." He left. I listened to his footsteps retreat down the hall to the sound of our bedroom door closing. He was sleeping the peaceful, dreamless sleep of a man who believed he was untouchable. He had no idea he was a fly, blissfully asleep in the center of a web that was about to be drawn tight. I turned back to my own email, intending to start compiling the financial evidence into a single damning file, and that's when I saw it. An unread message had arrived just an hour before. The sender was a name I didn't recognize, Brenda Jackson. The subject line was 5 simple, electrifying words. "For Mrs. Vance, please read." My heart began to pound a slow, heavy drum beat. With a trembling hand, I clicked it open. Dear Mrs. Vance. The email began, the text plain and direct. My name is Brenda Jackson, and I am a senior accountant at Sterling and Associates. I have worked here for 15 years. I have a daughter of my own, and I was raised by a good woman who taught me to stand up for what is right. Even when it is difficult, I cannot stay silent any longer. I have watched too many good women in this city be hurt by powerful men who think they are above consequence. You deserve to know the truth. My breath caught in my throat. Attached to the email were 3 files. I clicked on the first one, a PDF document. It was a collection of scanned receipts and internal expense reports, all submitted by Marcus and approved by Diana. But these were the unedited originals, not the sanitized versions he showed me. I saw hotel bills from the Ritz-Carlton in Chicago with charges for couples massages. I saw a receipt from a Tiffany & Coder boutique for a diamond tennis bracelet that I had most certainly never received. My hands were shaking now. I clicked on the second attachment. It was a series of forwarded email exchanges between Marcus's and Diana's corporate accounts. They were intimate. They were damning. They planned their trysts, disguised as business trips. They shared private jokes, and then I saw it. The paragraph that sucked all the air from my lungs, it was from Marcus to Diana, dated 3 months ago. Just got off the phone with V. She's in full planning mode for our big anniversary trip to Italy. It's almost pitiful how predictable she is. God, I need some excitement in my life. She's a wonderful financial manager. I'll give her that, but she is a boring wife. A wave of nausea washed over me. Boring. Predictable. A financial manager. That is what I had become to him. With a sense of dread, I clicked on the final attachment. It was an audio file. I put on my headphones and pressed play. I heard their voices clear as day. A recording likely captured by a phone accidentally left on a desk. They were laughing. Can you believe she's still looking at brochures for the Amalfi Coast? Diana's voice, deep and throaty. Let her, Marcus's voice replied, full of a cruel, dismissive amusement. It keeps her busy, gives her a little project. We'll have our own anniversary trip. I was thinking we could finally do that jazz festival in New Orleans. That was it, the final twisting of the knife. The cold, hard financial data was now married to the irrefutable human proof of their deep and abiding contempt for me. Any lingering whisper of love, any microscopic seed of doubt that this was all a misunderstanding was utterly and completely obliterated. My mission was now crystal clear. This was not a failing marriage to be mourned. This was a criminal conspiracy to be dismantled. I spent the next hour researching, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I was not looking for a divorce lawyer. I was looking for a warrior. I found her in the profile of Elise Porter, a woman with a legendary reputation as the most feared and respected family law and financial crimes attorney in Atlanta. Her specialty was high-asset divorces involving hidden assets and corporate malfeasance. I picked up the phone. When her receptionist answered, my voice was not the soft, melodic tone of a piano teacher. It was as cold and sharp as forged steel. My name is Vivian Vance. I need to schedule an immediate emergency consultation with Ms. Porter. My husband, Marcus Vance, a new senior partner at Sterling and Associates, has been systematically embezzling from our marital assets for several years to fund a long-term affair with his boss, Diana Sterling. I have bank statements, damning email correspondence, and audio recordings to prove it. Please inform Miss Porter that this is a case of significant and premeditated financial fraud. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line, then a flurry of typing. Ms. Porter can see you at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. I will be there. I said, and hung up. Marcus was still asleep upstairs, dreaming the peaceful sleep of a man who believed his fortress was impenetrable. He had no idea that a quiet accountant named Brenda Jackson had just handed me a key to the armory. And he had no idea that I had just made an appointment with the one woman in Atlanta who would not be afraid to help me burn that fortress to the ground. The next morning, I dressed with the deliberate precision of a general preparing for battle. I chose a dark, charcoal gray suit, its lines clean and severe. My face was a neutral mask, my emotions locked away behind a wall of cold resolve. In my new leather briefcase, the one I had bought for him, now repurposed for his destruction, was the dossier I had compiled, the financial statements, the emails from Brenda Jackson, the digital recorder with its damning audio file. It was a complete and total indictment of his secret life. Elise Porter's office was not like the stuffy, wood-paneled dens of the city's other old guard lawyers. It was a modern, minimalist command center on the top floor of a downtown skyscraper. Her corner office had floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic, almost predatory view of the city below. The furniture was all sharp angles and chrome, the air clean and cold. It was a space designed for clarity, not comfort. Elise Porter herself was the human embodiment of her office. She was a tall, formidable woman in her 50s with intelligent, piercing eyes that seemed to see right through you. She did not offer me a cup of tea or condolences. She offered me a firm handshake and a single direct instruction. "Show me what you have, Vivian." I didn't speak of my broken heart or the 28 years of betrayal. I spoke of the facts. In a calm, steady voice, I walked her through my all-night investigation. I laid the bank statements on her glass desk, the spreadsheet I had created tracking the embezzled funds. I handed her the printouts of the emails highlighting the key phrases: predictable, boring wife, keeps her busy. Finally, I placed the small digital recorder on the desk. "This is an audio recording of my husband and his boss, Diana Sterling, laughing about the anniversary trip I was planning, while discussing their own trip for the same week, to be paid for with our money." Elise Porter listened in absolute focused silence, her sharp eyes scanning each document, her expression unreadable. She did not interrupt. She simply absorbed the data, her mind a high-powered processor calculating the odds, assessing the damage. When I was finished, she leaned back in her chair, a long, thoughtful silence filling the room. "Vivian," she said finally, her voice as sharp and clear as a diamond, "let me be very clear. What you have brought me is not a standard infidelity case. Your husband's affair, in a legal sense, is the least of his problems." She leaned forward, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "He didn't just cheat on you. He systematically and intentionally defrauded you. He converted marital assets, your shared assets, for his own personal, non-marital use without your knowledge or consent. In the eyes of the law, that is not just betrayal, that is theft." She tapped a finger on the stack of financial papers. "In this state, spouses have a fiduciary duty to one another. It is a legal obligation of the utmost trust and good faith in the management of your shared financial life. Your husband has not just breached this duty, he has obliterated it. No judge in this city will look kindly on this." A profound sense of validation washed over me. She was giving my pain a legal name, a shape, a weapon. "And his partner in this," Elise continued, her voice hardening, "Diana Sterling, by approving fraudulent expense reports, which I am certain we will find, and using her position of power to facilitate this arrangement, She has exposed not only herself, but the entire firm of Sterling and Associates to significant legal and financial liability. This is not just a divorce, Vivian. This is a corporate demolition. The word divorce landed with a thud, a reality I hadn't fully allowed myself to process. But Elise was already moving past it, her mind focused on the strategy of the war to come. "We will not be filing a simple, quiet petition for divorce," she stated, her voice electric with a warrior's energy. "That would be a disservice to the scale of his crimes. We will be filing a major civil suit, alleging fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. We will attach the divorce proceedings to that suit. We are not asking for a fair 50-50 split of the remaining assets. We are demanding the return of every single stolen dollar, plus punitive damages for the calculated long-term nature of the fraud." It was then that I played my final card. "His firm's annual awards gala is in 2 weeks," I said quietly. "He is being honored. They are naming him Partner of the Year." A slow, cold, and absolutely terrifying smile spread across Elise Porter's face. She understood instantly. "Oh, that's beautiful," she whispered, the words full of a dark, strategic joy. "That's perfect. That's not a party, Vivian. That's a stage. In his world, a man's reputation is his most valuable asset. We are going to bankrupt his. Publicly, spectacularly, and in front of his entire professional world." Together, we mapped out the plan. It was ruthless, precise, and theatrical. A process server would be hired. We would wait until Marcus was physically on the stage at the absolute zenith of his professional life, holding his stupid award, to serve him. We would simultaneously serve Diana as she sat in the front row, a captive audience to her lover's downfall and the beginning of her own. I felt a thrill, a surge of power so intense it almost frightened me. I had come into this office a heartbroken wife. I was leaving as a client, an architect of a brilliant and devastating legal strategy. For 28 years, I had used my meticulous planning skills to build our family's secure and prosperous future. Now, I would use those same skills to execute my husband's utter and complete ruin. The irony was as sharp and satisfying as the final crashing chord of a symphony. The night of the Sterling and Associates Annual Awards Gala was the glittering apex of the Atlanta business social calendar. It was held in the grand ballroom of the Grand Georgian Hotel, the very place I had claimed as my sanctuary 2 weeks prior. The room was a breathtaking spectacle of crystal chandeliers, cascading floral arrangements, and the city's most powerful people, all dressed in their finest gowns and tuxedos. The air hummed with the clinking of champagne glasses, the murmur of self-congratulatory conversation, and the soft strains of a live jazz quartet. I made my entrance alone. I had chosen my gown with the care of a general choosing her battle armor. It was a stunning creation of deep crimson silk that clung to my frame, elegant, powerful, and utterly unapologetic. A simple diamond necklace, a gift from my parents, was my only jewelry. I was not Vivian Vance, the predictable wife. I was Vivian Vance, a woman about to conduct the most important performance of her life. As I walked in, heads turned. I saw the whispers, the curious glances. My story, thanks to the incident at Sterling Properties, had become the city's most delicious piece of gossip. I took my designated seat at the main corporate table directly in front of the large stage. A few tables away on the dais sat Marcus and Diana. They were the king and queen of the evening, basking in the adulation of their peers. Marcus caught my eye and gave me a brilliant, confident smile accompanied by a small, relieved nod. My presence, my beautiful gown, my calm demeanor, he had interpreted it all in the most self-serving way possible. He believed I had come to my senses, that I was here to play the part of the supportive wife to protect our family's image. He was, as always, a fool. The dinner was an agonizing parade of mediocre food and long, boring speeches. I ate little, my attention fixed on Marcus and Diana. I watched the way their eyes would meet across the table, the subtle, proprietary smile she would give him, the shared arrogance of two people who believed they had gotten away with it all. Across the ballroom, near an exit, I saw the man Elise Porter had hired. He was a discreet, forgettable-looking man in a simple gray suit, blending in perfectly. He caught my eye for a fraction of a second and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. He was in position. The orchestra was tuned. Finally, the moment arrived. The firm's elderly founding partner, Mr. Sterling himself, Diana's father, walked to the podium to present the final, most prestigious award of the evening. The Partner of the Year, he announced, his voice booming through the ballroom, is an award given not just for professional success, but for embodying the values of this firm: integrity, loyalty, and a commitment to excellence. He gave a glowing speech about Marcus's vision, his leadership on the Sterling Tower project, and his dedication. Then, with a grand flourish, he announced his name. Ladies and gentlemen, our Partner of the Year, Marcus Vance. The room erupted in a thunderous, sustained applause. Marcus rose, kissed Diana on the cheek, and strode onto the stage, his face alight with a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. He accepted the heavy crystal award, holding it up for all to see. He began his speech, thanking his colleagues, Mr. Sterling, and of course Diana, for her invaluable mentorship. Then he turned his gaze to me. And most of all, he said, his voice thick with a nauseatingly false sincerity, I have to thank my incredible, supportive, and wonderfully predictable wife, Vivian. Honey, none of this would be possible without you. The word predictable hung in the air, a private insult he thought only he understood. It was his final fatal error. As the applause swelled again, the man in the gray suit began to move. He walked with a calm, unhurried purpose, not towards the exit, but directly towards the stage. A ripple of confusion spread through the crowd. The applause faltered, then died completely. The ballroom fell into a dead, expectant silence. The process server walked up the short flight of stairs and stopped directly in front of my husband. Marcus Vance? The server asked, his voice calm and clear, perfectly amplified by the microphone Marcus had just been speaking into. Marcus, his triumphant smile frozen on his face, nodded dumbly. You have been served, the man said, and placed a thick, heavy legal envelope into Marcus's free hand. In that moment of absolute perfect silence, I stood up. Every eye in the ballroom, hundreds of them, swiveled from the stage to me. I let them stare. Then I spoke. My voice not a shout, but a clear, powerful declaration that carried to every corner of the room. For those of you who are confused, I announced, my voice as steady as a metronome, that is a civil lawsuit for long-term financial fraud, embezzlement of marital assets, and breach of fiduciary duty. My husband, your Partner of the Year, Besbranche, has been stealing from our shared retirement and pension funds for years to finance his affair. A collective horrified gasp sucked the air from the room. Marcus stood on the stage as if he had been turned to stone, the crystal award in one hand, the lawsuit detailing his ruin in the other, his face a bloodless mask of pure, abject horror. But the performance was not over. The process server stepped off the stage and walked with the same deliberate pace to the head table, stopping directly in front of the frozen, horrified Diana Sterling. "Diana Sterling?" he asked. She could only manage a small, terrified nod. "You have also been served," he said, placing a second, identical envelope on the table in front of her. "This is a notice of impending legal action against you for your role in this matter, and a formal complaint has been filed with your firm's board of directors, citing gross ethics violations, corporate malfeasance, and conspiracy to commit fraud." The ballroom erupted into a chaotic symphony of whispers, gasps, and the frantic tapping of thumbs on cell phones. The elegant facade of corporate decorum had been utterly shattered. I did not stay to watch the full implosion. My work was done. With every eye in the room fixed on me, I turned with a quiet, perfect dignity and walked out of the ballroom, my head held high. I didn't look back. The symphony of their destruction was just beginning, and I had no desire to stay for the performance. I had leveled their fortress to the ground, and on its ruins, for the first time in a very long time, I could finally see the stars. The story of what the Atlanta Business Chronicle dubbed the Gala Ambush became an instant legend in the city's corporate and social circles. In the days that followed, my phone rang incessantly, but I answered none of the calls from gossips or reporters. I let the storm rage outside while I remained in the quiet, calm eye of it. The public narrative split into two camps. To some, I was a vindictive, scorned woman who had orchestrated a cruel and unusual punishment. But to many others, especially women who had seen their own contributions to a partnership be overlooked or devalued, I became something of a folk hero, a symbol of quiet strength finally roaring to life. For Marcus and Diana, the fallout was swift, brutal, and absolute. As Elise Porter had predicted, the board of directors at Sterling and Associates, terrified of the legal and reputational damage, moved to cauterize the wound immediately. An emergency internal investigation was launched and presented with the same damning evidence I had given Elise. Their conclusion was foregone. Diana Sterling, the brilliant, powerful titan of architecture, was forced into a quiet, immediate, and deeply humiliating resignation from the firm her own father had built. Marcus, the newly minted Partner of the Year, was fired for cause, his termination effective immediately. His Crystal Award was, I was told, discreetly removed from the firm's trophy case. Their careers, built over decades, were vaporized in a matter of days. Our legal battle was, in the end, not a battle at all. It was a complete and total rout. Faced with the overwhelming evidence, the bank statements, the emails, the audio recording, and now a whistleblower in Brenda Jackson willing to testify, Marcus and Diana had no defense. Their lawyers advised them to settle, and to settle quickly to avoid an even more embarrassing public trial. The final judgment, handed down by a no-nonsense female judge who looked at Marcus with unconcealed contempt, was a masterpiece of legal justice. I was awarded sole ownership of our marital home, free and clear. The entirety of our remaining retirement and investment accounts was transferred to my name. Furthermore, the court placed a lien on Marcus's future earnings and assets to repay, with interest, every single dollar he had embezzled from our funds, plus a significant sum in punitive damages for the calculated long-term nature of his fraud. Elise had been true to her word. She had not just secured my future, she had restored my past. My adult children, a son in California and a daughter in New York, were on the first flight to Atlanta when the news broke. They arrived at my door, their faces a mixture of shock and concern. I sat them down in our living room, the one that was now solely mine, and for the first time I told them the whole unvarnished truth. I told them about the affair, about the stolen money, about the emails and the recording. I saw their shock turn to anger and then to a fierce, protective loyalty that warmed my heart more than any legal victory ever could. They wrapped me in their arms, their love a powerful shield. And in that moment, I knew that the true fortress of my life had never been my marriage to Marcus. It had been the family I had raised. With the legal storms finally past, I poured all my energy into the one place that had always been truly mine, my music studio. Word of my story had spread, and something remarkable began to happen. Women from all over the city began calling, signing up for lessons. They were not just aspiring musicians. They were women who had been through their own bitter divorces, women who had been cheated on, women who had put their own dreams on hold to support their husbands' careers, only to be left with nothing. My studio became more than a place for learning scales and arpeggios. It became a sanctuary, a place of quiet understanding and shared strength. We would talk over tea after a lesson about music, about art, about the challenges of reclaiming your own life after it had been derailed. The sound of the piano, the shared language of music became a form of therapy for all of us. The business flourished, my schedule filled to capacity, my life suddenly rich with new friendships and a profound sense of purpose. I had won the war. I had reclaimed my assets, my home, and my dignity. I was surrounded by the love of my children and the respect of a new community of women I was proud to call my friends. My true victory wasn't found in a legal document or a newspaper headline about Marcus's downfall. It was found here, in the rising crescendo of a student's determined practice, in the shared laughter that echoed through the halls of my studio between lessons. I had taken back my house and my money, but I was just beginning to heal my heart. I thought my symphony was complete, but I was about to learn there was a final, quiet movement yet to be written. The seasons turned, and the raw, jagged edges of my new life began to soften. The story of my public stand against Marcus faded from the headlines, becoming a piece of Atlanta lore, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. The legal victory had been swift and absolute, but the true healing took place not in a courtroom, but within the walls of my music studio and the quiet sanctuary of my own home. My house, once a crime scene of a dead marriage, was slowly reborn. I filled it with music, with the scent of fresh flowers from my garden, and with the laughter of my children and the small circle of loyal friends who had stood by me. My studio became my heart's true home. It was a thriving, vibrant community, a place where the piano was more than an instrument. It was a tool for empowerment. I watched women who came to me, timid and broken from their own life's battles, find their voices and their strength through the discipline and beauty of the music. We were a quiet sisterhood, bound by a shared understanding that reclaiming one's life is the most beautiful composition of all. A year after the divorce was finalized, I decided to host a small, informal salon at my home, a jazz and classical music evening for my friends and senior students. The evening was warm, and the French doors of my living room were thrown open to the garden, the soft sound of a Chopin waltz mingling with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. My friend Eleanor arrived with a man I had never met. "Vivian," she said, "this is my dear friend Robert. I hope you don't mind. I insisted he come along. He's a retired history professor, and I thought you two would have much to talk about." Robert was the opposite of Marcus in every conceivable way. Where Marcus had been a whirlwind of charismatic energy and sharp, expensive suits, Robert was a figure of quiet, academic calm. He was a tall, kind-faced man with thoughtful eyes that held a gentle, scholarly light. He didn't talk about business or status. He didn't mention my infamous divorce. During a break in the music, he approached me as I stood by the piano. "That was a beautiful rendition of the nocturne in C-sharp minor," he said, his voice a warm, gentle baritone. "You play with such feeling. It always makes me think of the composer's own heartbreak, writing it in a world that was falling apart around him." And just like that, we were deep in a conversation that felt as natural and easy as breathing. We talked about Chopin and the Polish uprising, about the history of jazz migration from New Orleans to Chicago, about a new biography of Nina Simone we had both just read. It was a conversation between two equals, a meeting of two minds that had spent a lifetime gathering knowledge and passion. For the first time in so long, I was not managing someone's ego or playing the part of a supportive wife. I was just Vivian, a woman with her own thoughts, her own ideas, her own soul. That evening led to coffee the following week, which led to a long walk through the botanical gardens, which led to a quiet dinner at a small Italian restaurant he knew. Our courtship was a slow, peaceful unfolding, a stark contrast to the dramatic, operatic tragedy I had just survived. With Robert, there were no grand pronouncements or expensive gifts. There was the simple, profound pleasure of shared silence while reading in the same room, of debating history over a bottle of wine, of him listening, truly listening, as I played the piano just for him. He was not interested in the fortress of my wealth. He was captivated by the garden of my mind. One evening, months later, we were sitting on my porch, watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance in the twilight. "You know," he said, taking my hand in his, "when I first heard your story, what everyone was talking about, I wasn't struck by the revenge or the drama." "Oh?" I asked, turning to look at him. "What were you struck by?" "Your strength," he said simply. "And your music. It takes a remarkable soul to create such beauty in the wake of such ugliness." Tears welled in my eyes, but for the first time in years, they were not tears of pain or anger. They were tears of a deep, quiet gratitude. He did not see me as a victim. He did not see me as a warrior. He simply saw me. I had reclaimed something so much more valuable than the money Marcus had stolen. I had reclaimed myself. The trip to the Amalfi Coast, the one he and Diana had so cruelly mocked, I had taken it myself the previous spring. I had stood on a cliff overlooking the impossibly blue Mediterranean, a free woman beholden to no one. I had finally learned that my worth was not determined by my role as a wife, a mother, or a financial manager. I was no longer someone's anchor, the predictable, stable foundation upon which their own grand ambitions were built. I was the symphony itself, strong, complex, full of soaring highs and somber lows, and finally, at long last, playing in my own key.